our delegations. But doing international bodies, one thing which is true, I'm afraid, is that we spend an awful lot of time in airports, especially when flights are delayed. And Ming always had a story, and they were genuinely fascinating. And it's been mentioned about his legal career. And one particular story I like, because it showed his quick wit. He's able to move swiftly on his feet, which I understand for a QC as he was quite important. Being able to quickly adapt. And he said he'd been prosecuting a defendant who had caused a fray for a drunken disorderly. And he said, he put the question, so how much had you drunk? And apparently this defendant said, oh, about only 8 or 9 pints. He said he paused and he said, are you meaning to tell this court that you drank a gallon of beer?
भूख लगेगी तो स्कूल में पीछे ही रहेगा और पेट भरेगा गंदम से। इसीलिए नेस्ले बुनियाद लाया नया पीने वाला दलिया, जिसमें है गंदम और आयरन की दोहरी ग़िज़ाइयत। बस पानी में घोलो और पी लो, इससे पेट भरे और ग़िज़ाइयत भी मिले। नेस्ले बुनियाद का नया पीने वाला दलिया, पेट भरेगा तो आगे बढ़ेगा, सिर्फ 40 रुपए में।
And you don't consider that to be very much. He said at that point, he said, I knew I had it. And he would tell so many stories, and not least, Mr. Speaker, he was very proud of his time in San Francisco, where he was training to be a top sprinter. He said, academically, it didn't go quite as well as it should have done. He said, I think I just spent far too much time at the track. Mr. Speaker, he was enormously respected across the world, as I've said. He was a great friend to me. He was a great sage. His politics were clear, but his party allegiances didn't matter when it came to important roles of state and the intellectual rigour that had to be brought to some of these important issues. Mr. Speaker, I will miss him. I know a great number of people in this House will miss him. He truly was a giant of British politics.
Point of order, Stephen Gathens.
Mr. Speaker, I had the distinction of succeeding Ming Campbell in this place, and whereas he probably wasn't unhappy that I'm not his current successor, he spoke so highly of his current successor, I have to say how highly I thought of him. But more importantly than that, I've heard so many nice stories today about his role globally, but I'm sure as a member for North East Fife has already reflected so beautifully, he was so highly regarded locally. And when I took over from him, it was difficult to go to any of one of the 99 communities in his constituency where there was not a story or there wasn't somebody that was helped. Also, as a colleague at the University of St Andrews, he was an outstanding Chancellor and colleague. So I wanted to pay a tribute to somebody that I may not have agreed with, but when we have that precious commitment, the precious relationship between constituency and Member of Parliament, no one better replicated that in his day-to-day work. And I wanted to pay tribute to a European, an internationalist, but more than that, an outstanding local representative.
Point of order, Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, I would wish to add my words of tribute to my friend Ming Campbell, who had an impact on me long before I met him. 1987 was the first general election I was active in, and no offence to any Liberal MP at the time, and there's none of them here present, I'm very impressed. Ming Campbell struck me as not being like other Liberal MPs. He looked like he could actually run the country, and had a gravitas. That's how it's got. This is a man. I'm pretty sure that's what I said to my mother in the early hours. Whatever it was, you'll know what it was. on the 12th of June, I think, 1987, when he gained North East 5 from the Conservatives, you look the real deal. You look incredibly competent. And of course, in the years that followed, he demonstrated that. We've talked about the Iraq War. But what Ming Campbell did, yes, applying his legal expertise and his insight into international law as well as the law of this land, was a connection between what is often thought as this esoteric business of human rights. Human rights are about human duties. It's about making sure that nobody is above the law, no Prime Minister and no President. And he made that clear and indeed cross over into public consciousness in a way which was really very, very remarkable. I then realised I had a connection with him. When I met my wife in the 90s, Rosie, it turned out that her now sadly late father, Mark Cantley, opened a bowling with me at Glasgow Hill Head. And they hadn't spoken to each other for like 30 odd years until Ming came to do a talk at the University at Ambleside when I was shortly after I'd been selected. And the two of them continued a relationship and a friendship until Mark's passing just 2 years ago. In 2005, when I was elected, the late great Charles Kennedy was meant to be doing the constituency visit to Westmoreland. His son was born the night before. Ming got drafted in and at the last minute did 2 visits for me. And when you win by 267 votes, every single thing counts. I have him to thank for that. He became leader in 2006 and I had the honour of serving as his PPS during that time. What insight did I get into that? The fact that he was obsessed with sport and with running. And despite the fact this is a man who could run 100 metres in 10 seconds, he was incredibly generous in hearing the stories of somebody who was a 10th-rate fell runner. In my time as leader, he was a great source of advice, great source of wisdom. And then after that time, he and his wife Elspeth, who we've mentioned, would regularly come on holiday on Ullswater, and they'd always make a point of coming to do a visit in Westmoreland, whether we asked them or not. And my recollection would be Ming talking to the local newspaper or the local TV, and Elspeth not only with a fag but with a pink cigarette holder, looking every bit what Lady Penelope from the Thunderbirds would have looked like in real life. It is said, isn't it? I remember one of our predecessors, the late great Joe Grimmond, once said that the best Liberal candidate should dress to the right and talk to the left. And Ming Campbell bore all the airs of being an establishment figure and was a radical to his dying breath. He was kind, wise, decent, talented, loyal. He was my friend, and I miss him.
Yeah. Point for order, Sir Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, I would like to state that Sir Ming Campbell, as he then was the perfect example of how it's possible to disagree with another parliamentarian on a key issue and yet work side by side on other issues without any rancour or any reservation. My dealings with him didn't get off to the best start. We were generally on opposite sides of the debate about the replacement of Trident submarines and the replacement of continuous at-sea deterrence by part-time patrols. Nevertheless, once we got to know each other better on the Intelligence and Security Committee, we found ourselves making common cause on such issues as the safeguarding of the vital BBC monitoring service for the future, the need to enhance spending on defence with an improved defence budgeting priority, and above all, the folly that could have happened of Britain militarily intervening in the Syrian civil war. In short, Ming brought courtesy, style, courage and grace to public life to the benefit of society as a whole.
हमजा बालकनी में प्लांट्स को सेट कर दो।
वो तो माली सेट कर देगा ना।
अरे वाह, मैं तुम्हारी प्रमोशन के लिए खुद को नए घर नए शहर में सेट करूं, तुमसे 4 गमले सेट नहीं हो रहे यार। क्या कर रहा हूँ?
सेट कर रहा हूँ खास चाय बना के तुम्हारा मूड
समझते हैं एक दूसरे को, इसीलिए बने हैं एक दूसरे के लिए।
चाय अच्छी बना लेते हो?
वैसे वीकेंड पे माली का काम भी कर लेता हूँ।
From Nestle.
Order, Christine Jordan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, I would also like to pay tribute to Ming Campbell, who, although I met him personally in later years, his political influence has hung over my entire adult life. As an 18-year-old student at Glasgow University, I heard about these three great figures of British politics who had studied together and been great friends. Donald Dewar, who became the First Minister of Scotland. John Smith, whose legacy as leader of the Labour Party is well respected. And of course, Ming Campbell. And it was his persona, his influence, his attitude to politics, his integrity, which I found influenced me and was one of the things which pulled me towards the Liberal Party as it then was. But the first time I came across him personally was years later, about a year after he had stepped down as leader, when I had to make my maiden speech to Scottish Conference and discovered that I was speaking on a motion being proposed by Ming Campbell. It was, of course, it comes no surprise to many, about Lookers, RAF Lookers, its future, and what we needed to do to defend it. And that was a kind of thread that ran through it. But then in 2017, when I was standing in Edinburgh West, he came and launched my campaign, helped me up onto a chair so that everybody could see me, and was just, there to be supportive. And I learned a lot about his kindness and thoughtfulness a few weeks later when my husband died. And Ming took the time to take me aside and make sure I was okay and that I had the support I needed to get through the campaign. Most of all, though, I enjoyed my chats with him on a Monday in the departure lounge at Edinburgh Airport. He always had a tale to tell, and he always had a kind word for my Scotsman column. And my team in the office were endlessly amused by how pleased I was that Ming Campbell had even read it, never mind agreed with it. He was in many ways, with that integrity, kindness, thoughtfulness that everyone's spoken about, an example that we should all live up to and try to aspire to. There's a certain restaurant in Pimlico, which I'm sure many of my colleagues are aware of, that many of us introduced to by Ming Campbell and think of him every time we go there. And I think we will the next time as well. We may make a point of going there and raising a glass to someone who's not just an example of what we should be, but perhaps of what the world needs now more than ever amongst its politicians.
Gavin Robbins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In a point of order, I think it is appropriate that I, on behalf of the Democratic Unionist Party, and indeed I trust all Northern Ireland parliamentarians, that we extend our condolences to the Liberal Democrats and extend condolences to the colleagues who knew Ming Campbell better than I did. I first came across Sir Ming when I was at school, and he became leader when I was at university. And for me, it wasn't his prowess or his intelligence, it wasn't his ability to launch an argument, it was his name that struck me. Ming. I knew of no other Mings than Ming the Merciless. And yet we got to know Ming the Merciful. And we got to know Ming the politician who stood and achieved the respect of colleagues right across this House. He was a sincere unionist, an avowed Scot and a true parliamentarian. And I just take this moment in time to pass on our respects for his life and a tribute to his legacy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the point of order, I'm sure that Ming will have been delighted with the tributes paid to him today by the Prime Minister, my right honourable friend for Kingston and Surbiton, and many others. And just as importantly, Elspeth will have been equally delighted, and she will have been raising a glass of champagne in celebration. Ming is remembered as a brilliant and successful athlete and an accomplished, distinguished advocate. He was a real fixture in this House, completely authoritative on foreign policy and defence matters for more than 2 decades. Less well remembered is that it took him three elections and a decade to get elected to represent Fife, which he held then for 28 years. So he was sympathetic and hugely supportive of my similarly numerous efforts to win in Wokingham. For all that patrician charm he deployed to win over judges in court, he was also a savvy street campaigner who could be underestimated by his opponents at their peril.
Zig High-Tech Lubricants Limited.
नेस्ले मिल्क पैक अपनी क्रीमी और मजेदार जायके के साथ जिंदगी का मजा बढ़ाए। नेस्ले मिल्क पैक।
On one of his many visits to Wokingham, he was asked by a local journalist, "Why do you visit Wokingham so often?" His reply was, "I have invested so much in this young man." And it was only 10 years ago. I am determined to see that he is successful. And he was delighted when that investment paid off last July. He was very generous with his time and his advice. He was a very warm and generous friend to me, to my family, and to many colleagues, and many, many friends that he made in Wokingham along the way. He will be fondly remembered by everybody who knew him well. And by wide agreement, Ming is probably one of the nicest people to ever lead a political party in the UK.
Point of order, Conway.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, it's an honour to follow the tributes of so many across the House. Ming Campbell was an inspiration to me and to many others who admired his integrity, courtesy and tenacity. I was lucky to have known Ming all my life, and I know how much his death will be felt by his family and the many friends who loved him. I shared their grief. Ming's athletic achievement showed a man determined to work hard and make sacrifices to push himself to the limits. His international success has already been mentioned, but I also remember him in his mid-40s at that point, saying with some feeling that the annual school sports day had become a major focus, since he was the one the other dads wanted to beat in the father's race. Behind that gracious facade, there was a true competitor. Ming was one of that remarkable generation of Glasgow University debaters from all parties who strove for a better society. Across a lifetime in politics, he maintained close friendships with those of other parties, yet he was clear on his politics. Ming's tenacity was shown in his dedication to Scottish liberalism, working hard to win the North East Fife seat on his 5th general election. And Ming served our party for many years as Foreign Affairs spokesperson. With his distinctive, eloquent delivery and his disarming courtesy, Ming could easily be underestimated by some as an orator, not an actor. Yet his principled approach to the Iraq War demonstrated his courage and steel. He did not shirk from doing the right thing. For Ming, international liberalism was not an abstract ideal, but a set of practical moral obligations. As we say goodbye to a much-loved parliamentarian, we also remember a private man. Ming's marriage to Elspeth was the anchor of his life. The last time I saw Ming, he spoke with love and feeling about Elspeth. He was continuing his life's work in Parliament, but it was clear that he felt acutely that he was continuing it without his life partner. Theirs was a truly devoted partnership. Ming Campbell lived an incredible life as an athlete, advocate, political leader and loving husband. He was a lifelong liberal whose principles drove his choices. He is rightly remembered with admiration and affection today across the House. He will be sorely missed.
That completes the tributes. We now come to the statement. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I update the House on the peace process in the Middle East and my trade visit to India, I want to put on record in this House my utter condemnation of the vile anti-Semitic terrorist attack at the Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester, which killed 2 Jewish men, Adrian Dalby and Melvin Kravitz. Mr. Speaker, anti-Semitism is not a new hatred. Here in Britain, Jews have had to deal with the shameful reality that their buildings, their way of life, their children need extra protection. We must also be crystal clear that while this was an attack on Jews because they were Jews, the Islamist extremism that motivated this sick individual is a threat to every citizen of this country, an attack on British values, British security, and the British decency that holds our communities together. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, we can see clearly that anti-Semitism is on the rise in Britain once again. So we will scale up the protection we provide for Jewish people. We will set out new measures to prevent hatred abusing the democratic right to protest. We will stop at nothing to root out anti-Semitism. And Mr. Speaker, the same applies to the arson attack on the Peacehaven Mosque. An attack on British Muslims is also an attack on us all. So we condemn this despicable crime and the poison of anti-Muslim hatred. We will fight against hate in all its forms. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the Middle East, and words I have longed to say in this House for a very long time. The surviving hostages are free. Yeah. The bombardment of Gaza has stopped. Yeah. And desperately needed aid is starting to enter. Yeah. As a result of the peace plan led by President Trump. We have the chance, and it is a chance, to bring a terrible chapter in history finally to a close. Mr. Speaker, it's a moment of profound relief for this House, for this nation, indeed for the whole world. But it is tempered, of course, by the knowledge that for the hostages and their families, for the loved ones of those killed on October the 7th, and for the innocent civilians in Gaza, the dead, the bereaved, the starving, this has been 2 years of living hell. I think of Avinatan Orr, who has family ties to the United Kingdom, returned at last to his family and to his girlfriend Noah. Avinatan and Noah were taken from that music festival 2 years ago. The footage of their abduction, filmed by Hamas, evil, committed to camera. I've met Avinatan's family and heard for myself the agony that they suffered for 2 long years, waiting for him to come home. His frail condition, shocking evidence of the appalling treatment he must have endured. Mr. Speaker, we await the release of the deceased hostages. Those families need the chance to grieve, and so we demand that they return to their families immediately. Mr. Speaker, my thoughts are also with the people of Gaza, almost all of whom will have lost family members, husbands, wives, brothers, sisters, and of course, worst of all, sons and daughters. Over 20,000 children killed. I think of people like Yara Yagi, who I met a year ago, 17 years old. She was studying at college in Hertfordshire. She had lost 44 members of her family. 44. A pain that cannot be erased, even as we welcome the peace today. But, Mr. Speaker, mercifully, the killing and destruction has now stopped, and aid is beginning to enter Gaza. But to be clear, we urgently need to see more aid and faster. All
ले आओ हेड एंड शोल्डर्स जो डैंड्रफ को 100% तक खत्म करे।
हेड एंड शोल्डर्स लाए तो बाल बच गए।
Restrictions must now be lifted. The need for food, sanitation, healthcare and shelter are still acute. While the signing yesterday was historic, what matters now is implementation and getting help in as quickly as possible. The UK is providing £20 million in additional humanitarian support to get water, sanitation and hygiene products to tens of thousands of civilians across Gaza. That is in addition to the support that we're already providing. Our 2 field hospitals in Gaza have already seen 600,000 patients. And earlier this month, Mr. Speaker, we evacuated the 3rd group of sick and injured Palestinian children to the United Kingdom, and they are now being treated by the NHS. And we will work with the UN and our partners to go further and faster to provide the aid that is so desperately needed. And, Mr. Speaker, let no one be any doubt that none of this would have been possible without President Trump. This is his peace deal, delivered, of course, with President Sisi of Egypt, the Emir of Qatar, and President Erdogan of Turkey. Alongside our partners, we have also offered the UK's full support to these efforts. Mr. Speaker, we've worked behind the scenes for months with the US, Arab and European nations to help deliver a ceasefire, get the hostages out, get aid in and secure a better future for Israel, Gaza and the West Bank. I am proud of our contribution. And Mr. Speaker, we are in a position to play this role precisely because of the approach this government takes. And Mr. Speaker, that does include our decision to recognise the state of Palestine, because this move, taken alongside our allies, France, Canada, Australia and others, helped lead to the historic New York Declaration, where for the first time the entire Arab League condemned the atrocities of October the 7th, urged Hamas to disarm and, crucially, demanded that they end their rule in Gaza. But, Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear. While we celebrate the relief of peace today, making that peace last will be no less difficult a task. Along with our allies, our absolute focus in the days and weeks ahead is the relentless implementation of this peace plan. That is no small challenge. And so we stand ready to deploy our diplomacy and expertise in 3 key areas. First, to support the reconstruction of Gaza. It is an immense task. The devastation defies description, and it will require a truly international effort. But we are ready to play our part, starting with a conference here in the United Kingdom this week, hosted by my honourable friend, the Minister for the Middle East. Second, to support transitional governance arrangements in Gaza. We will continue to work closely with the Palestinian Authority on the vital reforms that they need to make. And third, to help ensure security in Gaza through a ceasefire monitoring process, planning for the International Stabilisation Force. And, Mr. Speaker, drawing on our experience in Northern Ireland, we stand ready to play a full role in the decommissioning of Hamas weapons and capability. Because, as this House knows, there can be no viable future for Gaza, no security for Israel, if Hamas can still threaten bloodshed and terror. So we will work to put that threat out of action for good. Because, Mr. Speaker, this is the first real chance we've had at a 2-state solution since the Oslo Accords over 3 decades ago. So we are fully committed to this, because a safe and secure Israel, alongside a viable Palestinian state is the only way to secure lasting peace for the Middle East. And I've been clear all along, Mr. Speaker, that must be our goal. So we will work now to follow through on the 20-point peace plan and deliver it in full, including by supporting a dialogue to agree on a political horizon for peaceful coexistence. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to update the House on my discussions with Prime Minister Modi last week in Mumbai. India is a growing force on the world stage, on track to have the third largest economy by 2028. So, in addition to the bond we already share, the living bridge of family and history, we are also united by the future and the incredible opportunities that we see before us. That's why back in July we signed a historic trade deal, opening up new opportunities for British businesses in India. And that's why last week I led the biggest British trade delegation to India ever. We announced that more British universities are opening campuses in India, making us their leading international education provider. We're deepening the UK-India Technology Security Initiative to boost opportunities for our brilliant tech sector. And we announced new deals and investments, including in advanced manufacturing, defence, car production and Bollywood filmmaking here in the United Kingdom. These investments into the United Kingdom are worth £1.3 billion and, Mr. Speaker, they will create 10,600 jobs. This is real change that people will see in their communities up and down the country.
अब नए और पहले से बेहतर एरियल से होंगे दाग और डाउट दोनों आउट।
I set this out, Mr. Speaker, because it again speaks to our approach on the world stage, as do our deals with the United States and the EU, and the approach we bring to crises and conflicts as well. Because instead of threatening to walk away or indulging in the cheap political theatre that comes from castigating our allies, allies that we need to deliver peace and economic stability in a dangerous, volatile world, we stay in the room, we trust in diplomacy, and we back the reputation, talent and pride of this country to change the world to the benefit of the British people. A politics of national renewal that works with our partners rather than against them, that solves problems rather than exploits them, and that believes our openness to the world is what helps us take control of our future, rather than shutting the door and hoping for the best. That is how this government delivers for Britain, Mr. Speaker, and I commend this statement to the House.
Rid of the opposition, Kemi-Bedro.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. I remember almost 2 years ago meeting 3 mothers whose children had been stolen from them on October 7th and held captive in terror tunnels. They were living a nightmare unimaginable for any parent. Many of us on these benches have met hostages, their families, heard their stories and supported them. Yesterday, it was truly momentous to finally see the return of the 20 living hostages who are now back home in Israel after over 730 days in terrorist captivity. The hostages released yesterday showed superhuman endurance in the face of evil, and we send every best wish to them and their families as they begin the process of rebuilding their lives. We also mourn those hostages killed by Hamas and continue to call for all their bodies to be returned to their families. Mr. Speaker, we must never forget what happened on the 7th of October 2023. The abduction of men, women and children was a calculated cruelty to break body, mind and soul after inflicting the mindless horror of rape and murder. There is no cause, no grievance that can ever justify what happened that day. I, for one, will never forget. And the response from some in the West, The equivocation, the indulgence in whataboutery, and the drawing of false equivalence shows how far moral clarity has eroded. And we have got a job to do here at home, Mr. Speaker, to fix this. So on these benches, we stand alongside Israel in our shared fight against Islamist terror. The conflict could have ended a long time ago if the hostages had been returned. So many Palestinian lives have been needlessly lost because of this war. Mr. Speaker, Hamas is a genocidal terrorist organization. A sustainable end to the suffering of civilians in Gaza means the complete eradication of Hamas and the dismantling of its terrorist infrastructure. Even now, we know that Hamas is still killing Palestinians in Gaza. The initial phase of the US-backed peace plan represents a significant breakthrough. I want to thank the US administration, President Trump, and regional mediators for having secured this outcome. They put in the hard yards and found solutions, making clear that all progress would depend on the release of the hostages, a condition that some other governments forgot. Mr. Speaker, with this peace deal, there is much to be hopeful for in the Middle East. If the Abraham Accords are expanded, a new age of peace will have arrived. We will see diplomatic normalization of Israel with the Arab world, something many of us have longed to see. And it saddens me that the Prime Minister's statement does not appear to show that the UK was at the heart of any of these efforts specifically. It is quite clear that UK relations with Israel have been strained by the actions of this government. Their view, and they have stated publicly, is that it looks like under pressure from his own backbenchers, the Prime Minister has taken the wrong decisions, time and time again, diminishing our influence in the region. They can shout shame as much as they want to, Mr. Speaker. Within weeks of Labour coming into power, they decided to restore funding to UNRWA. We haven't forgotten. An organisation, they say yes, that's an organisation whose members assisted in the kidnapping of these hostages, the release which we are celebrating today. Relations with Israel have been so damaged that when Israel launched strikes against Iran, a country that has been a direct threat to us for years, the UK was out of the loop. They may not like it, but it is the truth. And then, in a move praised by Hamas, Labour decided to recognise a state of Palestine with no condition to release the hostages still held in the tunnels of Gaza, rewarding terrorism.
I'd say with ClickUp, doing my daily tasks is up to 10 times faster.
The work of a law firm is massive. Many different parties, a ton of tasks, you're working with the court system. ClickUp saves me a tremendous amount of time and also provides me with peace of mind that I'm not missing anything.
Just being better organized, having it all in that one central place does wonders. And that
They may chant it from a sedentary position. I will remind them of what the former British Israeli hostage, Emily Damari, said. She called it a moral failure. I'm surprised to hear the Prime Minister say in his statement that it was a contribution to this peace deal. We all know that the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio condemned this recognition, saying it had made ceasefire negotiations harder. That is what the US said. The truth is, as historic events have unfolded in the Middle East, Britain has been out of step with the US. The US ambassador to Israel even called the government's claim that it played a key role in the ceasefire delusional, something Israeli foreign ministers agreed with. Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister's promise to scale up protection for Jewish people in our country. Britain has always been a sanctuary for British Jews, but after the tragic murder of 2 British Jews outside a synagogue in Manchester, the government must now do everything it can to eradicate anti-Semitism. The anti-Israel protesters who have turned our streets into theatres of hate have been relatively silent about the good news of a ceasefire and hostage return, showing us their real motivation. The Prime Minister mentioned in his statement the Palestinian Authority. Can he tell us whether the government's preference for the Palestinian Authority to take the reins in Gaza if they have committed to end the pay-for-slay policies that reward families of terrorists for killing Israelis. Will it deal with anti-Semitism in education, and are they demonstrating any democratic progress? Mr. Speaker, there are also domestic implications. We need to strengthen our borders. Hamas is still running Gaza. Those who would be allowed to leave can only do so with Hamas's approval. We should not be bringing anyone to Britain with links to extremism, anti-Semitism, or to Hamas and other terrorists. So can the Prime Minister confirm whether he intends to bring people from Gaza to study, for healthcare, or for other purposes? And what measures are in place to ensure we are not importing extremism, anti-Semitism, or anyone linked to Hamas and other terrorists? Mr. Speaker, Britain is a great country and still a powerful one. We still have agency to shape the world around us. The government must do better and show it has the backbone to use Britain's power to make a better world.
Can I thank her for the words she said about the hostages just a moment ago, and I know how heartfelt they are. I was surprised and saddened that she spent more time attacking what we actually did to help the process than even mentioning the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Without setting out in terms the number of people that have been killed, that are starving, been subjected to denial of aid, when the immediate task for any serious government is to work with allies to get that aid in at speed. I would have expected at least an acknowledgement of that terrible situation. It shows yet again just how far her party has slid from serious statesperson approach to diplomacy. This is not the time for a fight about what role any individual played. I am proud of what Steve Witkoff said about our National Security Advisor. He was negotiating this. He knows absolutely the role we played, and this House should be proud that we played that role. We played that role only because of the relationship that this government has with the Trump administration. We are a trusted partner working both before this peace deal and afterwards. And yes, I did discuss recognition of Palestine with President Trump when he was over here. That's what grown-up, responsible partners do, unlike the discussion here. And I'd stand by my words that the first time in New York was the first time that other countries in the region were clear in their condemnation of Hamas. That was a key and important aspect of what has now happened. In relation to her questions, she will know from the reforms that have already been committed to, that the Palestinian Authority and any elections will not tolerate any election of individuals or parties that are not committed to a peaceful process. That is an absolute red line. It is part of the agreement. It's what we've been talking to other allies about for a very, very long time. On healthcare cases, yes, as I reported, we have had healthcare cases coming to the United Kingdom and students, and of course we're extremely careful in the checks that we carry out on everybody that comes to this country. But I return, Mr. Speaker, to the fact that this is a historic deal. It is important for the region, it is important for the world, it is to be celebrated across this House because of the relief it brings to the hostages and their families in particular, and to the many thousands of people in Gaza. And I was, as I say, surprised and saddened that she overlooked what to me is a really important part of the resolution of this conflict.
बच्चे तो कोई भी ग्लास उठा सकते हैं क्योंकि दोनों दिखने में एक जैसे हैं और ये नहीं जानते पानी से जुड़ा है इनका हेल्थी फ्यूचर। पर आप तो जानते हैं ना, कंफ्यूज्ड? हेल्थी फ्यूचर जुड़ा है इनकी हेल्थी हाइड्रेशन से, जो देता है नेस्ले प्योर लाइफ, जो स्विस हेरिटेज को बरकरार रखते हुए पिछले 25 साल से जायद अरसे से आप और आपकी फैमिली को हाई क्वालिटी हेल्दी हाइड्रेशन फराहम कर रहा है। हमारी आज की चॉइसेस से ही बनता है इनका हेल्थी फ्यूचर, और हेल्थी फ्यूचर से कीमती कुछ नहीं।
From Nestle.
Fancy Japan? Mount Fuji, cherry blossoms, majestic temples, Japanese cuisine. Yes, you'll get it all. Worried about the high cost? No. Affordable travel is possible. With Asia Odyssey Travel, discover Japan's best on a budget. Iconic experiences meet incredible value in this clean, safe country. In our small group, travel smarter, explore deeper. Visit vibrant cities, dive into rich culture, experience the Shinkansen bullet train, stay in 4-star premium hotels, springtime cherry blossom themed itinerary. Or prefer your own style? Skip the group and tailor your Japan vacation with us. Book now. Your journey to Japan begins here.
Chair of the International Development Committee, Sir Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Prime Minister, his ministers and all the officials that I know have been working behind the scenes incredibly hard for the last 2 years to get to this historic point. He is right, it is a chance of peace, and I am nervous for the next stages, but it is definitely a chance to get aid flooding into Gaza. I wonder if he could give us some more details about how in practice that will happen, with Israel controlling all of the borders. I also wonder if he could speak about the role of UNRWA. And can I say to the Leader of the Opposition, UNRWA is a UN organisation that acts as the local authority, providing education, providing medical, providing sewage, doing the desalination. And it is an organisation central to supporting the Palestinians facing starvation and dealing with the consequences of genocide. Can I urge the Prime Minister to continue to rally the international community to put pressure on Israel to let that aid flood in, and also to make sure the Palestinians are central in the future of their communities?
Well, can I thank her for her hard work over many years on this issue, and thank her for raising the question of aid. Madam Deputy Speaker, the critical test of the next few days and weeks will be whether that aid gets in. Of course, there is the goal of a two-state outcome, but the immediate task over the next days and weeks is to get that aid in. It is beginning to go in, but not in sufficient quantity and not at sufficient speed. I spent a lot of yesterday, and our teams are working together with others, particularly with the King of Jordan, in terms of what practical assistance we, the United Kingdom, can give to ensure that aid gets in as quickly as is needed. It is probably one of the most central issues in the coming days and weeks, and I thank her for raising it.
Sir Ed Davey.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I first of all thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement, and can I start by joining him in condemning the evil anti-Semitic terrorist attack that killed Adrian Dolby and Melvin Kravitz at their synagogue in Manchester. Anti-Semitism must be stamped out, and British Jews must be able to feel safe in our country. Mr. Speaker, after the horrific Hamas terror attacks of October the 7th and 2 years of appalling death and destruction since, the ceasefire in Gaza comes as an enormous relief to us all. It finally offers a moment of hope, but it is only the beginning, and there is a lot of work to do. Already today we can see how precarious the situation is, with Israeli forces killing Palestinians, they say, across the yellow line, and both sides accusing each other of violating the ceasefire. So the immediate priority must be to ensure the ceasefire does hold, as well as to make sure that life-saving food, water and medicine reaches all those facing starvation and disease. So can I ask the Prime Minister to set out in more detail what the UK is doing to get aid into Gaza as quickly as possible, and ask him to keep updating this House on those vital efforts. Madam Deputy Speaker, it was so moving to see the images yesterday of families weeping with joy as hostages were reunited with their loved ones. But does the Prime Minister share my anger and the anger of bereaved families that Hamas has still not released the bodies of all deceased hostages. These terrorists captured innocent people, held them hostage and killed them, and even now they deny their families the chance to bury them and mourn them properly. Palestinian families are starting to return home too, but for many, their homes are now rubble, and the process of rebuilding will be long and difficult. A ceasefire is not the same as a lasting peace. Only a two-state solution can deliver that. So welcome the Prime Minister's decision to finally recognise Palestine last month. And can I ask him what work he is doing with partners to help build a viable Palestinian state that can live peacefully alongside Israel? And has he spoken to President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu to make clear that the expansion of illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank must stop? Israelis and Palestinians have suffered unimaginable trauma. Much of it will never be healed. But today they can at least begin to hope that their children will go free of this appalling cycle of violence.
Zip High-Tech Lubricants Limited.
Well, can I thank him for the content and tone of his response. In relation to his questions, we are working with others on getting aid into Gaza. Until recently, that have been mainly airdrops. Obviously, what we really need is trucks going in, and that's what we've been focusing on, in particular in the practical work that we were doing yesterday whilst we're in Egypt, and we will continue to do so, and I will take up his invitation to update the House in relation to that. I do personally think that in these early days, it is probably one of the single most important things that we need to absolutely focus on, because yes, it was a historic day, but implementing this is really important, and any misstep, any step backwards would have the potential to undermine what actually happened yesterday. In relation to the bodies, I absolutely agree. They must be released. Those poor families need to be able to grieve properly, and they cannot do so. And it is cruel that they've been held so long, and they must be immediately released. In relation to the two-state solution, look, this is necessarily and rightly the long-term objective, because I do not believe there will be lasting peace without a two-state solution, a safe and secure Israel, which we do not have, or a viable Palestinian state, which we do not have. And so that must be the end goal, and we're working with others to ensure that that remains the goal. Along the way, there has to be the work on the governance, the security and the reconstruction in Gaza. And I have to say, once the media are fully into Gaza, I think we will be having quite some debate in this House when the full horror of what has happened there and devastation is finally seen. In relation to illegal settlements, yes, I absolutely have made clear in relation to the West Bank what must happen, or not happen, I should say, in relation to the illegal settlements. And it's important that we ensure that this is a process that leads to a lasting peace for Israel, for Gaza, and of course for the West Bank as well.
John McDonnell.
The Prime Minister mentioned his conversations with President Sisi. Can I take this opportunity to thank him for the conversations and interventions that he had with President Sisi and his team to secure the release of Allah Abdi el-Fattah from an Egyptian prison? We're all elated at the release of the hostages and the detainees and prisoners, but there's some confusion about whether or not two prominent Gazan Palestinian doctors have been released. Dr. Hussam Abu Safia and Dr. Marwan Al-Hams. Both of them were detained and unfortunately ill-treated within the Israeli prisons. It would be really helpful if the Prime Minister could now confirm whether they've been released or not, and if they haven't, to make further representations to Israeli authorities.
Can I thank him for his words in relation to Al-Fattah and his long campaign and raising of this important issue. In relation to the two doctors, what I can say to him is the cases have been raised. I don't yet know what the status is, but I will do my best to find out and get a better answer to him as quickly as we can.
Part of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
Beneath all the peace rhetoric, the brutal Hamas regime was openly executing people yesterday and refused to give up their weapons. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said he's going to remove them by force if necessary. He refuses to accept a state in the West Bank. I mean, it may be naive, but cannot both sides of the House unite in saying that we are absolutely, completely committed to creating a Palestinian state in the West Bank? This is their God-given right, and it's the only way we're going to end this cycle of despair and violence.
That sounds like the old I used to know, and I'm really pleased to hear it, because it is only, in a sense, by uniting across this House in the face of a conflict that's gone on for far too long and being clear-eyed about the only way there can be peace that is lasting, that we will be able to play a full part as our country in bringing that about. And I welcome the old tone and the old content that I just heard.
Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The emotional scenes in recent days in Palestine and Israel are proof that only politics and never violence can bring security to the people of the region. And accountability for the heinous killing that has taken place must be part of the future too. As someone who, as a then aid worker, stood in a hospital in Gaza last year, I know that the UK can play a key role in rebuilding Gaza's decimated health system. Will the Prime Minister meet me to discuss this? And will he convey the thanks of these benches to the National Security Advisor, who has played a truly vital role in making this ceasefire happen? Not for the first time, the Leader of the Opposition has no idea what she's talking about, and her backbenchers know it as well.
I thank her for that contribution, and I do acknowledge the role that National Security Advisor played, and it's important. It's a typical UK role, which is quiet, behind the scenes, diplomatic, but bringing around really helpful steps towards the desired end. I will make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister on the other issues.
Sir Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Was not yesterday an historic and much longed-for day for which this government and the last one have worked tirelessly since the dreadful events of October the 7th? Does the Prime Minister agree that just as real progress at Oslo was made on the back of the Intifada, so now we must use the exceptional connections and deep historical knowledge that Britain has throughout the region to help secure a definitive resolution for the Middle East problems that have disfigured the world and poisoned the well of international progress and opinion for so many generations?
Well, can I first acknowledge the role that he played in office just before the election and what he brought personally to the table in relation to this, and the cross-party way in which he worked to ensure that the House as a whole could bring to bear pressure to bring about change. He's right about the goal that we need to achieve and the way that we want to achieve it, and so I wholeheartedly agree with him. Thank you.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I start by saying to the Leader of the Opposition, not every statement in this House is an opportunity for political knockabout. And this is one of those occasions that required a statesperson. Can I ask my right honourable friend, there are reports that there are militia groups seeking to gain control of certain areas within Gaza. What can be done to make sure that it's the people of Palestine that determine their future and not the biggest gangs? And what can we do about this situation?
I thank him for raising this issue, and there are concerning reports of what gangs are getting up to, and the immediate next steps need to be, on the one hand, aid into Gaza, but also the question of better security arrangements into Gaza. I think that has to come in two stages. The stabilisation force will take some time, but it needs immediate steps to stabilise the situation now.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, may I begin by expressing relief at the release of the hostages, but anger that so many have not lived to see this day. Relief that Palestinians are not sheltering from the skies today, but anger that so many have not doing so without friends and family by their sides and with homes to return to. So as we all embrace that collective relief, let us not forget that access to aid is essential. Access by the world's media and investigators to document crimes against humanity is essential. A two-state solution is essential. Accountability is essential. And it is with those words in mind that I say to the Prime Minister what I said to his predecessor 2 years ago. History will judge us by our response and by our actions. Up till now, on too many occasions, we have failed. Let us not do so anymore.
Well, can I agree with him that aid is the immediate issue? I agree the media absolutely needs to be allowed in to document what has to be seen, and on a two-state solution, of course, there has to be accountability.
Paul Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement, and can I warmly welcome the ceasefire, both for the beginning of the end of the suffering of the children of Gaza and also for the release of the hostages, one of whom is Nimrod Cohen, whose brother I met in Jerusalem early this year and whose family are eternally grateful for everything that this country and the United States have done to secure their release. But can I also thank the Prime Minister for his emphasis today on the need to flood Gaza with aid, something we've not seen at all adequately until now? And does he agree with the UN's Tom Fletcher that more governments need to urgently fund the UN's flash appeal for the occupied Palestinian territories?
Well, I thank him for his question, and I agree that flooding aid is the essential next step, and I took the opportunity to have a discussion with Tom Fletcher yesterday about what more we could do in that regard.
Kit Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, setting aside the fact that we find ourselves in a situation where conditions have been placed upon the cessation of the annihilation of an entire people, or the strange delineation between hostages on one side and prisoners held in administrative detention on the other, we should, of course, all, as the Prime Minister said, express profound relief at the end of the killing, not least of one child every 45 minutes for 2 years. Isn't the lesson, though, of the last 2 years that when the UK finally moves on from empty rhetoric to take concrete action, that there is movement in the parties to a conflict like this, and that therefore we should be thinking about what more concrete action we can take, and in particular in 3 areas. First of all, can we please have concrete steps to deter Israeli territorial ambition in the West Bank, including a ban on settlement goods now that we've officially recognised that territory? Secondly, could we have a reassertion of UK support for international law and the institutions which support it? And in particular, if he could use his relationship with President Trump to have the sanctions on individuals at the UN and the International Criminal Court lifted. And finally, if we are to support or participate in an international stabilisation force, could we please insist that it also covers areas B and C of the occupied Palestinian territories, where the IDF, I'm afraid, too often acts as cover for incidents of Israeli terrorism?
Well, I thank him for his question and taking each of the 3 parts. Certainly, on the West Bank, we have taken action, as he knows, and will continue to look what further action we can take where we can with other countries. But it's important, as we focus on Gaza, that we do not forget the situation in the West Bank, as he rightly knows. On international law, yes, of course we're committed to international law and proud to uphold it, and I'm pleased to hear him do so. It was once the proud position of his party as well, sadly no longer the case. On the stabilisation force, the terms of reference are still being drawn up. There is a United Nations Security Council resolution in terms of the establishment of the force, or I hope that there will be, but the wider terms of reference not yet agreed, but I'll bear in mind what he has to say.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his statement. and also add my congratulations to him, the National Security Advisor, and all his ministers for the months and months of work that they have done that have contributed to this, so generously acknowledged by the US envoy to the Middle East, if not the Leader of the Opposition. Yeah. But could I ask my right honourable friend if he agrees with me that as work towards a just peace continues apace, the principles of Gazans for Gaza, whether that's in the governance arrangements or in reconstruction, must apply? Prime Minister.
Can I acknowledge her championing and work on this issue and agree with her that we must now all work towards a viable Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel as the only way in which we will have lasting peace.
Leila Moran. Deputy Speaker, I want to feel happy this week, but I find it impossible. Because with so much destruction and so much devastation and so many lives lost, you look back over the last 2 years and you ask the question, what on earth was it all for? But history teaches us that from the depths of that despair can often launch a positive future. And there is only one way to achieve the everlasting peace that President Trump so rightly talks about, and that is that two-state solution. Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in dignity and security. I would like to thank this government for recognising the state of Palestine. That was a promise made to my great-grandfather, finally made good. But that is an empty promise unless it is followed by statehood. So my question is simply to the Prime Minister, will he make the Palestinian state a reality, and will he give it his personal attention over the course of his premiership so that this is the last time we see this devastation, not the repeat of that ever cycle of violence that we have always seen from the past?
Can I firstly acknowledge the impact that this has had on the honourable member and her family, an extended family, that is evidence of the despair that she rightly describes, and we must, from the depths of that despair, build a better future. I do believe that is only going to be lasting if we have a two-state outcome, and we've seen too often in the past what appears to be a step forward and is rightly seen as a point of relief only for things to fall back. And I give my personal commitment that we will work tirelessly to ensure that this time we build on the signing of the agreement yesterday through all the work that's going to have to be done along the way until we get to that final lasting solution, which will have to be a two-state solution.
Gurinder Singh Josan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you to the Prime Minister for his update in the House on the 3 points. And I join the Prime Minister in his condemnation of the anti-Semitic terrorist attack in Manchester and also the arson attack on the Peacehaven Mosque. And I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to fight hatred in all its forms and the support provided for security at synagogues and mosques. And I do ask the Prime Minister to ensure that security at all our places of worship remains a priority. The approach taken by the Prime Minister on the Middle East and the ongoing engagement with India of pragmatic engagement has been shown to be the correct approach. So does the Prime Minister agree that British values of democracy, respect, internationalism and perseverance are going to be key to the ongoing work required to deliver a two-state solution, but also further economic progress and trade deals that will benefit the people of the UK?
I thank him for his question, and can I just agree with him? We must provide the security needed at all of our places of worship, and I know across the House people will be saddened and concerned to know that some of our places of worship require the sort of security that we are seeing today. That is something we must all work to alleviate. That is partly a question of putting in more resource, but it's much bigger than that in terms of the change that we need to bring about. I do believe that the approach that we're taking of diplomacy, sticking to our values and being in the room to argue is of benefit to this country in relation to not only the Middle East, also India and the wider world.
Sir Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. After the horrors of Manchester, there is a sense of joy and relief in synagogues in my constituency at the final release of the hostages, many of whom were sponsored by synagogues. But there's also a sense of trepidation when they see Hamas terrorists patrolling the streets of Gaza, carrying out summary executions. So I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment that Hamas can have no role in Gaza. But while he's on the issue of Islamic extremism, does he agree that now is the time to review the UK government's approach to the Muslim Brotherhood, which has been banned in many other countries, such as the United Arab Emirates?
Can I just join him in this feeling of trepidation, because I think we can all feel it across the country, trepidation and fear following on from the terrible impact that the Manchester attack had on all of our communities, but the Jewish community in particular. Absolutely assert and be clear that Hamas must play no role whatsoever. And that is why it's so important that we work with our international allies on the follow-through now from what happened yesterday, aid, security, making sure that the steps are in place to move on at speed. And that is the biggest risk, frankly, to this agreement, that we're not able to move sufficiently quickly on those important issues. And the Muslim Brotherhood question we do keep under constant review.
Marsha de Cordova.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome this long overdue ceasefire and phase one of this peace plan. The devastating number of Palestinians killed, including more than 18,400 children, is intolerable, and there are countless others who have life-changing injuries. Now, the devastation that we have witnessed happened as a result of previous bombardments going and happening without any accountability. Those atrocities were awful. So I asked the Prime Minister what action will be taken to ensure that this time justice and accountability is made a reality for the destruction of Gazan civilians' infrastructure and for the man-made famine, and also for the mass killings of civilians.
Well, I thank her for her question. The immediate focus is obviously on following through on the agreement with the practical next steps, and I do think that is of first importance. But I reiterate again our commitment to international law and to accountability, including, of course, accountability for what happened on October the 7th, which was the worst single attacks on Jews since the Holocaust.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We all welcome the release of the hostages, the ceasefire, the beginning of the end of the suffering in Gaza. And I know the joy of the hostage families that I met a couple of weeks ago in Israel will be ecstatic. But as we hope that the divisions start to reduce in the Middle East, we must also hope that we can reduce the heat and the division of this debate here in the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister quite rightly has referred to the rise of anti-Semitism. And does he join me in hoping that now is the time that hopefully the protests we've seen on our streets, with anti-Semitic chants such as "from the river to the sea," that now is the time to bring those to an end as we try and unify, bring people together and move forwards?
Can I thank him for his question and agree that we do need to take this moment to work to bring all of our communities together. I was genuinely saddened to see some of the protests that were taking place on the very day of the Manchester attack in Whitehall, and then again at the weekend, notwithstanding the quite reasonable request to say, please exercise your right of freedom of expression on a different day in a different way. I genuinely thought that human decency would prevail there. But I agree with him that now is the time internationally to work on the agreement, and in the United Kingdom to do everything we can across this House to bring our communities together.
Tony Beales.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to welcome the Prime Minister's statement today, which we all hope will bring an end to 2 years of awful bloodshed. I visited Israel and Palestine 1 month before October 7th and met civil society organisations working cross-community, and it struck me how vital they'll be in building a potential future long-term peace. But they lack funding, they lack legitimacy and support in Israel and in Palestine. I'd like to ask the Prime Minister what thought and consideration he has given, what consideration he can give in future to the UK's role in an international peace fund in a similar model to the Northern Ireland Peace Fund that may fund civil society organisations working cross-community to support leaders of the future, to build peacemakers and to start to heal the rifts that we have seen.
Well, can I thank him for touching on this, because one of the great tragedies of what happened on October the 7th was that cross-community work, particularly in Israel and Palestine, involving the next generation, trying to ensure that they would have a better future and could then take things forward, fell away, as it did with some of the interfaith work in this country, which we all thought was stronger and more robust than it turned out to be. And so we must do all we can to restore that work and to build on that work, because it is essential as we go forward.
Joy Morrissey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We all welcome the peace in the Middle East, and we welcome, I don't think there is a member here that doesn't welcome a two-state solution, but there is concerns across this House about Hamas leading one of those states, where its fundamental goal is to drive the other state into the sea and have a total eradication of that race. And that hatred has been translated to the streets of London and the UK and is affecting our British Jews every single day, and they are afraid. And Prime Minister, I'm asking the Prime Minister, what will the Prime Minister do to actually alleviate the level of anti-Semitism that is transferring to the streets of London and Manchester and across the UK because of a war that has happened in the Middle East? Can we rise above this, and will the Prime Minister rise above this and find a way forward for the British Jews here in the UK?
Well, can I thank her for her question, and absolutely agree with her. There can be no way that Hamas can play any role in a Palestinian state, and that is the absolute red line of all those that recognised Palestine earlier this year, and the red line of the New York Declaration. And it is a really important and fundamental red line that has to be kept to, for all the reasons that she has set out, and I think across this House everybody understands. In relation to the security and safety of Jews in this country, of course we must step up. That needs to be done in a number of ways: practical support, financial support. Sad though it is to say that we need to put even more security in around our synagogues and schools, so children can go safely to their schools in this country. But we must do it, and we've already been working on that for some considerable time in government. I took the time the day after the Manchester attack to talk to the CST and other leaders about what more we can do in that regard, and I'm more than happy to work across the House on this. I think we owe it to our Jewish community here that we're seen to be working together on these important measures, and I thank her for her support.
Naz Shah.
I first of all associate myself with the comments from the Prime Minister regarding the attack, the heinous attack in Manchester and on Peacehaven Mosque. An attack on any place of worship is an attack on our democracy and our way of life. I'd also like to thank the Prime Minister and his team and his ministers in particular, and our Director for National Security, for all their efforts and for the recognition of Palestine. This is something that has been, as the member stated earlier, long overdue and historically put in a right that we should have done a long time ago. And that has no doubt contributed to where we are today. So once again, a huge thank you. But can I ask the question, whilst we have, I recognise we have over 92% of the homes in Gaza have been erased, more than 730,000 displaced, of them 520,000 children in particular. Could the Prime Minister outline in detail what more is being done to rebuild Gaza in addition to aid, in addition to our conversations? Thank you.
Can I thank her question, and reconstruction is a really important task. It will be extremely difficult given the levels of devastation. We are working with others on a plan. We are hosting a conference later this week here in relation to that issue, and we'll continue to do so, but we need to do so at pace, working with our allies, and it is a huge task that we have ahead of us.
Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The ceasefire, the release of the living hostages and the flooding of aid into Gaza is a moment of hope for us all. The Prime Minister has responded to a number of questions on accountability, and he will know the importance of this moment for starting to gather evidence about what's taking place in Gaza, both the atrocities committed by Hamas and the actions of the IDF and the mercenaries working for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation under direction of the Israeli Cabinet. So can the Prime Minister spell out in a little bit more detail what support the UK government is giving to those agencies that will gather the evidence that will allow for full accountability in future?
Well, I thank him for his question and his championing of these and raising of these important issues. It is important that as we move on from the agreement and rebuild, that there is accountability, and that is why it's important that the media and others are allowed access just as soon as possible, and those charged with holding others to account have what they need in order to do so.
Chris Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know I speak for my whole constituency when I welcome this long overdue ceasefire, and can I put on record my thanks to Prime Minister and Foreign Office Ministers for the many opportunities to put my constituents' views to them. As we turn to the ceasefire, thoughts turn to rebuilding, but that is not just physical. The children make up 50% of the population of Gaza. They are traumatised, and their educations and futures have been profoundly disrupted. Giving them a future is the best guarantor of future peace. So what can the British government do to ensure the children of Gaza have a real future?
I thank him for raising this because children in Gaza haven't been to school for the best part of 2 years. It's had a huge impact, and we are already working at pace with others to see how quickly that can be one of the first issues in terms of the rebuilding, because it's so essential for those children, and to ensure that they have a better future as we go forward.
Sir Julian Lewis.
The Prime Minister has said again today that there can be no place for Hamas in governing the Gaza Strip. But who can physically prevent Hamas retaining its weapons and regaining control as it did in 2006? And when he talks about anti-Semitism here in Britain, is there any other interpretation for the demand to internationalise the Intifada other than a call to attack Jewish communities around the world?
There's no other interpretation. I'm glad and pleased that he raised it and to give me the opportunity to agree with him on that important point. On the first point he makes about decommissioning, of course this is going to be difficult, but it's vital. It was difficult in Northern Ireland in relation to the IRA, but it was vital, and that is why we have said that we stand ready, based on our experience in Northern Ireland, to help with the decommissioning process. I'm not going to pretend that's easy, but it is extremely important.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I suspect one of the reasons why our optimism is cautious is that many of us are acutely aware that the damage that has been done will last a generation on all sides of this conflict, and for some the damage can never be repaired. I thought yesterday of my constituent Sharon Lifshitz, whose father Oded was brutally murdered by Hamas.
Vitamin C, goodness of fruits, or great taste. Nestle Fruta Vital. All is well that starts well.
From Nestle.
And spent his life driving ambulances across the border for Gazan children because he wanted that two-state solution. The Prime Minister spoke of the evacuations, and I'm very proud to have worked with Project Pure Hope, who were the first organisation to get children out of Gaza here to the United Kingdom for medical treatment. And now we have a scheme, but we know many more will continue to need assistance, and they will need the assistance that medical teams here in the United Kingdom can provide. So can you just update us on the commitments and how long that will be for that scheme, and how we can make that a dead's legacy in this House?
I can update. We are evacuating. We've got plans to continue to do so, and I'm happy to either myself or through other ministers update the House on what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Sammy Wilson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and first of all, can we welcome the release of the hostages and the prospect of long-term peace in that area of the Middle East. I know this is probably stick in the throat of many members opposite, but we must thank President Trump for the role which he played in delivering this deal. He recognised that weakness will never move terrorists, and only strength will do so. A lesson which, unfortunately, I think our government needs to learn, because Hamas were encouraged by the recognition of the Palestinian state which our government undertook. But that lesson needs to be applied at the next step. And the Prime Minister has rightly said that Hamas can have no role in the future of Gaza. What steps does he intend to take to ensure that, first of all, they don't have the guns which enable them to have control, that they relinquish that control, and they can never use Gaza again as a launching pad for their terrorist attacks?
He will know that I have thanked President Trump a number of times, and I'm absolutely clear that but for President Trump, this peace agreement would not have been reached. I've had the opportunity to say that to him publicly and also privately, because, as you know, we get along, and that is good for our relationship with the US and our ability to influence events. On decommissioning, this is such a serious issue, because it's very hard to see how there can be lasting peace unless Hamas is ridded of its weaponry and capability, and that's where I think the decommissioning work will be hugely important. It's part of the 20-point plan. It now needs to be turned into real actions, working with others, and I do think that the United Kingdom has got experience, sadly in some senses, but we do have experience of the challenges of decommissioning that we can bring to the table in relation to this.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Prime Minister's statement today and, of course, this peace deal? Can I also welcome his crystal clear statement that there can be no lasting peace and no viable Palestinian state in which Hamas is involved in any way? Similarly, there can be no lasting peace without the reconstruction that is now desperately needed. And I think the Prime Minister has said on a couple of occasions today that the public, I think, are going to be surprised when they see the extent of the devastation that's taking place. Right now, there are 400,000 tonnes of rubble that need to be removed before a single piece of reconstruction can take place. So can I ask the Prime Minister, will he reject the isolationist calls in some quarters and agree with me that this country will rightly play its full role in ensuring that reconstruction takes place?
Well, I can give him that assurance, and I genuinely think that across most of this House, that is the position that most members would want this government to play, and will support it.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much welcome the release of the hostages and what the Prime Minister has said about aid. But flooding Gaza with aid is not an end in itself. It's the distribution to those people who need it most. So what reassurances can he give the House that gangsters and criminal gangs will not play any part as intermediaries in the distribution of that aid?
Thank him for raising this. Firstly, let's be clear, aid is not flooding in today, it is beginning to go in today. It needs to flood in, but it's not flooding in yet, and so we do need to get it in. He's absolutely right that then the distribution becomes a critical next issue, and that's why we're working with others on what the security arrangements need to be in place as soon as possible in Gaza to ensure that aid gets to where it needs to get to. So volume, speed and effective distribution are absolutely key in relation to this, and we're working with others to ensure that we play our part in that.
Sana Begum.
September last year, the government announced that it has suspended 30 export arms licences to Israel, with around 350 licences remaining active. The government has repeatedly said it was blocking the sale of items to be used in Israel's military assault in Gaza, yet a new Channel 4 report has found Israel imported nearly £1 million worth of UK munitions in the first 9 months of this year, with a total of 110,000 items categorised as bullets from the UK to Israel in August alone. Could the Prime Minister confirm whether UK-made munitions were used in Israel's military assault in Gaza, and does he agree with me that a world for justice and with peace that is lasting must be won without these bullets and these bombs?
The government's position in relation to banning arms has been set out on many occasions, and it's not been altered.
Ellie Chams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome the ceasefire and was deeply moved, as I'm sure we all were, by the scenes of Israeli and Palestinian families being reunited yesterday. One of the Palestinian prisoners who has not been released is Mr. Marwan Barghouti, a member of the Palestinian Legislative Council who's been in prison since 2002 without a fair trial and subjected to human rights abuses. Can I ask the Prime Minister what recent representation his government has made in the last few days to secure the immediate release of Mr. Barghouti, given his widespread popularity as a unifying voice for Palestinian rights, dignity and freedom, and therefore his potential crucial role in securing a meaningful and lasting peace in the region? Mr.
Can I thank you for raising the individual case and offer to provide her with such further information as we can, as soon as we can, in relation to that particular case.
Yuan Yang.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I deeply welcome this long-awaited ceasefire and release of hostages, and I want to thank the Prime Minister and his ministers for their tireless work and international leadership on this front, including in the upcoming Gaza Recovery Summit to be held later this week in the UK. I'm glad to hear the Prime Minister's commitment to reconstruction and to aid. I note the UN Commission of Inquiry's recent report that described how the obstruction of aid into Gaza has led to what it calls the destruction of Palestinians. What is the current situation facing UN agencies' access to Gaza, and what more can we do to ensure that it flows freely?
Prime Minister.
Tom Fletcher is leading our work in relation to this, and we've been clear throughout that aid cannot get in on the scale and volume that's needed without the UN, and that's why we've always championed and said the UN should be part of that distribution.
Sir Julian Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is fitting that this statement is followed by one on Northern Ireland. The UK has world-leading experience on sustaining peace, whether it is security, intelligence or military, whether it is decommissioning, policing or political institutions. Could I urge the Prime Minister to do an audit of the generations of civil servants and, dare I say, special advisers who have experience in this area and put them on offer to sustain this peace deal?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank him for that suggestion? Can I also acknowledge his role in Northern Ireland, where he was rightly held in high respect in Northern Ireland and across this House, and continues to be held in respect because of what he did and the way in which he went about it. And that should be a model for so many more of us in this House. And the idea of reaching into the expertise we have in government across different parties, across different governments, is one that I'll take up. So I thank him for that suggestion.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome the Prime Minister's statement, and we all achingly welcome the long-fought ceasefire in Gaza and the safe return of prisoners and hostages. But does the Prime Minister share my concern that the 20-point plan is without Palestinian input? Will he acknowledge the need for Palestinian self-determination, their consent for any governance or stabilisation arrangements? Will he ensure the continued pursuit of war criminals? And will he work to achieve an end to Israel's illegal occupation of all Palestinian territories and the full engagement of a sovereign Palestinian state?
Prime Minister.
Can I just be clear on the 20-point plan? This was widely and warmly received by so many countries yesterday. He will have seen the representation at Egypt for the summit yesterday, including the Palestinian Authority, and therefore it is really important that when we get an achievement like this, that we now focus on implementing it rather than trying to unpick it. In relation to the two-state solution, I think across this House, by and large, there is agreement that there won't be lasting peace without a two-state solution, and therefore we must act to implement the 20-point plan, but we must also, as the plan itself envisages, work towards a two-state solution and not lose sight of that goal.
And Davis.
Diolch yn fawr, Madam Dirprwy Llafarydd. The images of ceasefire and families united are deeply heartening and a moment of relief and celebration amidst such immense suffering. Yet this fragile peace remains vulnerable, particularly to the corrosive effects of misinformation. And true and lasting peace must be built on openness, transparency and the free flow of information. What steps is the Prime Minister taking to press Israel to grant journalists access to Gaza as part of a broader commitment to truth, accountability and a just peace?
Minister.
Well, can I agree with her that the situation is vulnerable, and that's why we mustn't lose sight of what has to happen next. And we are pressing for media access, which is hugely important and needs to happen, in my view, as soon as possible, so that the extent of the devastation can be properly assessed and help with the necessary next steps.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as an officer of the All-Party Group on Christians in the Holy Land, I was fortunate enough to be on a delegation in Jerusalem and the West Bank last week. And it was clear to our delegation that speaking to Palestinian Christians that they are delivering hospitals and schools for Palestinian communities. And given the need for education and healthcare to be a key part of long-term peace, what conversations is the government having with the Christian community in Israel and Palestine to ensure they're part of the conversation as well?
Prime Minister.
We are having conversations with all, particularly on this question of education and healthcare. I mean, many other issues as well, but education and healthcare are absolutely fundamental. So we're having those discussions, and I'll ensure that any further information she may have is fed into what we're doing.
Dr. Andrew Murison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Hamas leadership is making it clear that its fighters, many of whom, of course, will have been involved on October the 7th, won't disband, but they will merge into the nascent army of a Palestinian state, a state which the Prime Minister unwisely and prematurely recognised. Is he comfortable with that?
Prime Minister.
The 20-point plan is really clear on the steps that need to be taken. That is what has been hammered out with the support and approval of so many countries. That is not easy, but it is a step that many thought was unachievable, and we now have to operate to that plan, ensuring, as is absolutely clear from the plan and from all of our statements, that Hamas can have absolutely no role in the governance in Palestine. That is a clear red line. We need to operate to the 20-point plan now. The widespread agreement to it is something many people thought couldn't be achieved. It has been achieved, and now we must build on that.
Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister for the awful attack in Manchester and the attack in Peacehaven. I just wanted to also highlight the issue around aid workers and the work of UNRWA, working with many British aid organisations, including Oxfam, including Christian Aid and Islamic Relief, who are both based in my constituency. And the UN highlights that today over 500 aid workers have lost their lives, so including British aid workers, so recognising the hard work that aid workers are playing. The Prime Minister has been very clear, and we are united in this House, that and Hamas must not have any role in the rebuilding of Gaza, and it has to be led by the Palestinian civil societies, communities who've had their efforts in the face of decades of siege, occupation and military violence. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that any initiative which bypasses the Palestinians in favour of externally imposed initiatives will fail?
Can I thank her first and foremost for raising the specific issue of the aid workers that have lost their lives in this conflict. Very many lives have been lost. almost all aid workers have colleagues and friends and family members who've been lost as well, and I've heard some of that testimony firsthand, and it's extremely powerful. In relation to the process, this must now be a process that does involve Palestinians in their own future. Of course it must, and that's the only way to get to the two-state solution that we need.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sure, like everyone else in this House today, I feel enormous relief at the fact that this ceasefire has been achieved, but that can be nothing to the relief felt by those Israeli families who felt they would never see their loved ones again. And those thousands of children in Gaza who were able to sleep last night without the fear of being bombed. But we've been here before, and for their sake, we cannot let the hope of today disappear in the same way that the promise of the Oslo Agreement did. And crucial to that is going to be confidence in the peace process. The Prime Minister has already alluded to the lessons that we can bring to that process from Northern Ireland. One of them is in decommissioning out Hamas. So can he tell us what support the US administration is going to offer?
अब पूरा पाकिस्तान है कभी भी कहीं भी जाने को तैयार, क्योंकि ये करते हैं AGS की मेंटेनेंस फ्री बैटरी पर एतबार। नो पानी, नो परेशानी।
From Nestlé. To allow us to use that expertise and experience.
Can I thank her? And look, there is huge relief, but I think she's absolutely right. The relief for the hostages and their families and for civilians in Gaza is huge by comparison to our relief. And yes, we have been here before, and therefore we must absolutely drive through with confidence here. As to the specific way in which decommissioning might work, we're at the early stage of that discussion with the US and others. At this stage, we've simply say we stand ready to play our full part. I think and hope we will be taken up on that, and then we can work actively with others. Thank you.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his statement today and also for this peace. May it be long-lasting. Over 1,700 health workers have lost their lives in Gaza, and many more have been physically and psychologically traumatised by the conflict. There aren't the health workers now to provide the health care which is needed at this urgent time. Will he ensure that the UK play its part in providing health care into Gaza, but also with the decimation of all the universities in Gaza, may we play a part too in training the healthcare workers of the future?
Well, thank you for that question. It's a really important point. We are working with others. There was a conference in Paris last week, which the Foreign Secretary attended, which had on its agenda, amongst other things, how we can support the restoration of health care, which is vitally important. As we do that, we will update the House on the measures we're taking.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the last 2 years as co-chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Israel, I've hosted innumerable meetings where families of hostages have come before us pleading for our support and our help. Equally, at the same time, we've shown the screening of the terror events on the 7th of October 2023 in multiple films. And that's real-life footage captured from Hamas terrorists. But the Jewish community in this country, as my honourable friend has said, feel unsafe. They feel it's not a safe place for them to live anymore. So the Prime Minister has quite rightly alluded to the growing rise of anti-Semitism in this country. So I ask him what he's going to do on a concrete basis to eliminate this scourge, and in particular at our places of education, both our universities, so our Jewish students feel safe on campus, but equally in all of our schools, so that the young people that are growing up in this country are no longer being exposed to anti-Semitism.
Can I thank you for that? And it is really important that we rise to this challenge and make sure that our Jewish community feels safe and secure and part of who we are in this country. I think that does require concrete steps in relation to security and safety measures. I absolutely think we need to go further on education, particularly in our universities, but not only in our universities. And of course, although he didn't mention it, but I'm sure he knows, the NHS as well, we need to ensure that we drive out any instances we see of anti-Semitism, and I look forward to working across the House on all those initiatives, because we also need to make sure that our Jewish community see that this House is united in ensuring that they have the safety and security that they deserve.
Nadia Whittam.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much welcome the Prime Minister's statement today. After 2 years of relentless genocide committed by Israel, killing many tens of thousands of innocent people, a ceasefire is a historic and hopeful moment, even though it took far too long to achieve. Watching released Palestinians and Israelis reunite with their families yesterday was deeply moving. But Palestinians are far from free. Their rights are still being denied. They are still living under occupation. They will continue to suffer. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Palestinians must be able to exercise their right to self-determination, and Israel must face accountability for its crimes against them? And what action will he take to make this a reality?
Minister.
Well, I do agree that there will be no lasting peace without a two-state outcome, and that's why we must continue to strive towards it. And of course there must be accountability for all of those that have committed atrocity, including those that were involved on October the 7th.
Adnan Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I press the Prime Minister, does he agree that real lasting peace can only be achieved if there is accountability and justice? Overwhelming international consensus, both legal and scholarly, conclude that Israel's actions in Gaza were genocidal. Does the Prime Minister agree that the perpetrators of genocide must face justice? And what steps will his government take to ensure justice is achieved?
Prime Minister.
Well, I agree that accountability is important. Of course, justice is important in the Middle East, and we are strong supporters of international law and the role that needs to play in relation to justice in the region.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's statement today, and also welcome the ceasefire and the release of hostages as part of this historic peace deal, but a very fragile peace deal. But I also welcome the release of Palestinian women and children held in Israeli military prisons without trial. But can my honourable friend explain what steps the government will take to ensure that justice and accountability is made a reality for all victims of international law violations in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank you for a question, and it is important that I'm clear that this government is committed to international law and to the accountability that brings.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One of the widely held beliefs of the catalyst that led to the pure evil that happened on the 7th of October was a fear by Iran and their terrorist proxies that Saudi Arabia was close to signing the Abraham Accords. Now, there is good news in that the Abraham Accords peace agreement between Israel, the UAE, Bahrain and Morocco have endured over the last 2 difficult years and are a model not just for regional economic cooperation, but peaceful coexistence in the region. So on the back of yesterday's agreement, can I ask the Prime Minister what concrete steps he is going to take to encourage and extend the Abraham Accords as a key part of the emerging picture in the Middle East, with a particular reference to getting Saudi Arabia back to the table?
Prime Minister.
Look, I'm grateful to him for raising the wider picture here, because the settlement across the wider Middle East is a really important backdrop and part of the background to what has happened here and what needs to happen in the future. So that is why we are talking to all parties about the immediate steps, the Abraham Accords, but also the wider settlement, if that's possible, because I think that'll play a really important part in stabilising the region. That's what is wanted, broadly speaking, by most decent, reasonable people.
Jonathan Davis.
Oh, wow.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The world held its breath over the last few days as a glimmer of hope was on the horizon. So can I thank the Prime Minister, Ministers, the Government and British officials for the progress that they've made with the United States to bring about this progress. This progress of the peace will only be embedded and sustained if it is built with ordinary people, Palestinians and Israelis, who yearn for peace. So can the Prime Minister tell me what steps he's undertaking to make sure that happens?
Minister.
Well, it is important we involve Israelis and Palestinians across the board and communities in the rebuilding, the physical rebuilding, but also the rebuilding of the relationships which were there just over 2 years ago, which held at least the prospect of a better future for the next generation. So we need to rebuild that on all fronts.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I congratulate the Prime Minister in getting us to this point. But the Labour government's role in decommissioning in Northern Ireland is not as complete as portrayed. In a memo in the 17th of January 2003, an advisor to the then Prime Minister, Tony Blair, said, "The IRA will never be able to account for all their weapons or retrieve them. What we should perhaps aim for is a few more big symbolic acts of decommissioning and then declare that the process is complete." Madam Deputy Speaker, that advisor was a certain Jonathan Powell, now the National Security Advisor. So will the Prime Minister give assurances that should the government be given such a role, that it won't be as lax?
Prime Minister.
I think the work on decommissioning Northern Ireland was really important, and that's the basis upon which we put forward our offer to stand ready with others to work on decommissioning in relation to the Middle East.
Olivia Blake.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to associate myself with the Prime Minister's condemnation of the horrific anti-Semitic terrorist attack on the Heaton Park Synagogue and, of course, the arson attack in Peacehaven. The Prime Minister emphasised the UK's commitment to humanitarian support, and we all know that whilst there's a ceasefire, which we all welcome, the humanitarian crisis is still very much ongoing. So can I ask the Prime Minister to confirm what extra monitoring and new mechanisms and assurances he is seeking in order to make sure that parties on the ground are able to get the essential aid to every single person who needs it within Gaza?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank her for that. We are having those conversations about the practical measures that can be taken on the ground with others, particularly the Jordanians, in terms of the physical arrangements that they think need to be in place to allow the aid in and then dissipated at pace, and that's a project we're working on tirelessly at the moment.
Greg Stafford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I associate myself with the warm and welcome news that this ceasefire has happened, and I hope it moves to a lasting peace. What assurances has the Prime Minister received from neighbouring partners, specifically Egypt, and what specific actions will he take, firstly to ensure that humanitarian aid can reach Gaza, but secondly that it is only humanitarian aid that reaches Gaza and that weapons, personnel and materials that could aid terrorists do not enter Gaza?
Minister.
Well, he makes a really good point, and the basis upon which we're having our discussions is that it must be humanitarian aid, and it must be humanitarian in the sense it genuinely is for that purpose, and that it's getting to the people who most need it. That does come down to the nuts and bolts of the practical arrangements on the ground with some of the neighbouring countries, and they're the discussions that we're having.
Claire Hanna.
I don't think anybody could fail to be moved by the scenes yesterday of hostages finally being reunited with their families and Gazans being able to contemplate days and nights without hunger and without bombardment. I would love to be able to celebrate and to believe as they are doing, and they should be given the space to do. But like many, I am anxious because we know that a ceasefire is not the same as a lasting peace.
Can the Prime Minister assure my constituents that the UK Government will continue to pursue accountability for past crimes, for building and rebuilding to be done with survivors and not over the top of them, and to ensure that there will continue to be justice for those facing aggression in the West Bank every day?
Minister.
Let me be clear, in the rebuilding it must go on, there has to be the bringing together of communities, but also the necessary accountability and justice for a full rebuilding towards a lasting settlement.
Monica Harding.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to flood Gaza with aid. The UN estimates that $4 billion is needed this year to address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and just 28% of this money has been pledged. The UK's contribution to humanitarian relief this year will only total $116 million. So with the entire population of Gaza in need of some form of humanitarian assistance, does the Prime Minister believe that the UK's contribution to Gaza's relief is adequate?
We have made a significant contribution. As we go forward, we're looking at public and private commitments to the reconstruction project that needs to take place. Not just the aid, but the rebuilding as well is a huge challenge facing us all, and we will rise to that with others.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, and I hugely welcome the ceasefire and the initial Gaza peace plan, including the release of hostages and prisoners, stopping of the bombardment of Gaza and the start of aid to trickle in. But peace is fragile. So can the Prime Minister reassure the House of this government's long-term commitment to working with international partners to support the rebuilding of Gaza, physically and politically, to ensure a lasting peace and a pathway to Palestinian statehood?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I can give her that important assurance, and I thank her for her question.
Tony Kruger.
Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, this ceasefire is tremendous news, and my sincere congratulations to everybody who was involved in bringing it about, whoever they were, including the British government. I was in Israel last week, and on the day that the ceasefire was announced, I visited the Nova festival site, and I spoke to civilians and soldiers on the Gaza border. And the Israelis I spoke to were deeply dismayed that the British government had decided to recognise the state of Palestine before Hamas had released its hostages, let alone disarmed. Does the Prime Minister understand why Israel cannot tolerate the idea of a state on its border that poses a security risk to its citizens? And will he undertake not to move forward to support the establishment of a Palestinian state until there is more than the promise, there is actually the reality of security for Israel?
Minister.
The terms upon which we recognise Palestine, in which all the countries did recently, was on the express acknowledgement that Hamas can play no part in the government. That is at the heart of the New York Declaration as well, and is absolutely part of the 20-point plan. And I think it's really important that we assert that and reassert it. That's been the constant position of this government, and my personal position, so I can give him that reassurance.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I warmly welcome the Prime Minister's statement, particularly his commitment to seeking a lasting, long-term peace in the region, because Israel will not be secure, the Palestinian people will not be free until we break this endless cycle of violence. But turning to the immediate situation on the ground, the Gazans still face a man-made famine. So I really welcome the flooding in of aid that the Prime Minister has talked about in his statement. But could you just say a little bit more about the timescale for that and how soon we can start to see that aid getting in and having an effect on the ground?
Prime Minister.
We need it to go in today, tomorrow and the coming days. We cannot delay on that front, and that is amongst the most essential tasks that lay ahead, particularly in relation to the man-made famine.
Lee Dillon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I add my support for the ceasefire yesterday and the first tentative steps on the journey to peace? President Trump has spoken about a board of peace, and one of the names floated as being on that is our former Prime Minister, Sir Tony Blair. So could the Prime Minister confirm if Sir Tony Blair is going to take a seat on that board? Is that as a private citizen or as a representative of His Majesty's government? And what role can this House play in scrutinising any appointment going forward and the progress of that board? Thank you.
Prime Minister.
Well, the board is an important part of the architecture. It's for others to decide what the membership of that board will be, but I can give the commitment that we will report to the House on any developments in that regard.
Josh Fenton-Glynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a huge relief to all of us that the hostages are sleeping at home with their families where they belong after 2 years of unimaginable horror. But this plan and the recognition of Palestine must only be the start of peace and accountability. Children are dying from a man-made famine. So can the Prime Minister please assure us that we will flood Gaza with aid and continue to respect the judgments and decisions of international courts and tribunals?
I can give him our assurance on both those issues.
Shaukat Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the ceasefire, the release of the hostages, and take solace in some knowledge, or at least hope, that unlike other debates of this nature, at the end of this one, countless Palestinian children will not have been killed by the IDF. But I'd like to ask the Prime Minister if he agrees with me that the people of Gaza do not need a colonial Viceroy, Tony Blair, anywhere near determining their future. The former Prime Minister, who has been in meetings with the Trump administration, is proposing a US-administered Gaza, rebuilding Gaza, resort on top of mass graves of men, women and children. So will the Prime Minister condemn this plan and Tony Blair's involvement in rebuilding?
Prime Minister.
I'm not going to condemn a plan that I welcomed yesterday. I think it's a really important step forward. It's a step almost everybody in this House has welcomed, including the honourable member. What is important now is that we build on that plan. It will be for others to decide the particular representation. Of course, there is the committee that will be really important in relation to the day-to-day matters in Gaza, on which, of course, there must be proper Palestinian representation. These are matters still to be determined, but I really think that it would be better if we don't try and unpick where we got to yesterday before we've even started to implement it, and to try and move forward, because that will, I think, inevitably take us backwards.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We know that humanitarian aid saves lives, rebuilds lives and plays that crucial stabilising role. I thank the Prime Minister for his emphasis on getting aid into Gaza, and it has been heartening to hear from UN agencies who are now crossing the border for the first time since March, getting in vital supplies like cooking gas and medicines. But I know some NGOs, including British NGOs, are still struggling to get the permissions they need to be able to operate. So can I ask the Prime Minister what more he will do to ensure that these immediate humanitarian relief efforts become a sustained, scaled-up part of Gaza's recovery, and that our British NGOs can also play their full part?
Minister.
Well, I thank you for raising this important point, and can reassure that is an issue we're raising with partners for all the reasons she set out.
Clive Jones.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Prime Minister and President Trump get along, does the Prime Minister think that he can secure the support of President Trump to get genuine progress towards securing a two-state solution, the only path to ensuring peace, security and dignity for both Israelis and Palestinians?
Prime Minister.
Well, look, I certainly agree it's the only path, and we are, of course, talking to our allies about it, including our American allies, in the way that he would expect, as trusted, respected partners, trying to address one of the most intractable problems in recent history, and will continue to do so.
Kirstin Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And like others, I welcome the ceasefire and the return of hostages to their families, but that is very much tempered by the loss of thousands of lives these past 2 years. Loved ones that are never going to be able to return home. Elected representatives, humanitarian organisations and individuals across the world, including our constituents, have given voice to the plight of the people of Gaza these past 2 years. So can he tell me what efforts will be made to ensure the people of Gaza will be safe and free to shape the future of Gaza, and for their voices to be heard in the months and years to come?
Well, can I thank her for reminding us that, however welcome the news, it is tempered by the loss over the last 2 years in Gaza and in Israel, and that it is essential that the voices are heard of those that are most affected by this and are part of the rebuild that is now necessary.
Jim Allister.
I gladly join in the tributes of appreciation to all, including President Trump, who made the long-awaited release of the hostages a reality yesterday. But could I press the Prime Minister on the issue of the disarming of Hamas? For the Prime Minister, is that wholly non-negotiable? How is it to be delivered? And if it is not delivered in totality, where does that leave this nation, having recognised a Palestine, which then would have a continuing presence of an armed and controlling Hamas?
Prime Minister.
Well, it must be non-negotiable, and that's why it's written into the 20-point plan, which is why we are now putting ourselves forward to play a part in the decommissioning, because it's only by decommissioning that we can ensure that the threat from Hamas is removed, and that's why it's in the plan. That's why we want to play our full part, and we'll do everything we can with other allies to bring that about.
Lizzie Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and, of course, welcome an end to the killing in Gaza. And I would like to ask the Prime Minister what guarantees are in place to ensure that humanitarian aid can now reach Gaza without interruption, and that this aid will be independent of the whim of the Israeli government or any other actor on the ground.
Well, we're doing all we can to ensure that that is the case, because it's important for all the reasons that she well understands. That now involves the practical measures, working with other countries to ensure the aid can get in at speed, at volume. It is beginning to go in, but it's by no means in the right volume or speed, even now after the agreement, and that's what we need to focus on.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to associate myself with the tributes paid to Lord Campbell from across the House, and to thank the Prime Minister for his statement. I also welcome the release of all hostages and the several hundred Palestinian detainees as well. But we must remember that there are over 10,000 captives, some prisoners but many without charge, that are still held in Israeli prisons, and I hope the government will work towards the release of the innocents that are being held. The rebuilding and the interim and final governance of Gaza must be Palestinian-led, not by Western actors. The Palestinians have suffered over 2 years of a relentless genocide and decades of Israeli siege, occupation, military violence and oppression. I totally agree with the position that Hamas must not have any role to play in any future governance of Palestine. However, one of the, and there's no excuse for what happened on October the 7th, but one of the root causes that's preventing a two-state solution from becoming reality is the unlawful occupation of Israel.
Can the honourable gentleman please get to his question? Thank you.
So will the Prime Minister confirm to this House when the government will be in full compliance with the ICJ advisory opinion on not doing anything that helps perpetuate the unlawful occupation?
We will come back to the House on that. We proudly uphold international law.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister's urgent statement on the Middle East also included a celebration of our newly formed relationship and trade deal with India. Did the Prime Minister's discussions with PM Modi last week also include raising the case of my West Dunbartonshire constituent Jagtar Singh Johal? And if so, did he insist upon his immediate release and return home to his family in Dumbarton? He is 8 years arbitrarily detained in India. Enough is enough. Prime Minister, it's time to bring him home.
Well, can I thank him for his question and his work on this? And yes, I did raise it with Prime Minister Modi, and UK officials regularly raise this case. And the Foreign Secretary will be meeting Jagtar's family in coming weeks, and we'll keep the honourable member updated.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We welcome the news very much that there is a ceasefire and that those hostages have finally been returned home after 2 long years in unimaginable conditions. Smiles on the faces of family members is a joy to behold. While President Trump deserves much credit for the peace deal, our own Prime Minister and our own United Kingdom government also deserve some credit for the role that they've played in support of trying to get the peace. What discussions have been held with the United States of America to ensure that Hamas terrorist murderous intent is stopped? Hamas have been systematically murdering all those who have stood up against them and since the ceasefire took place. Many executions of those within the Gaza township have been an example. Hamas must be destroyed. What has been done to see Hamas weapons removed and their influence eradicated entirely? Thank you.
Well, can I wholeheartedly agree with him in terms of the spirit and intent behind the question? Hamas is a terrorist organisation that has inflicted violence on far too many individuals and destruction, and they can play absolutely no part in the future. And our recognition of Palestine was expressly on that basis. And we will continue to work with other countries to ensure that that is the situation, because it's vital that that is part of a peaceful and lasting settlement in the region.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much welcome the Prime Minister's statement today and would like to thank him and his ministerial team and their advisers for all the work that's gone on over many months to get us to the point that we're at, where there is some hope for peace in Gaza and also for peace for Israel. But in this process, as we go forward and as we try to build peace, can he ensure that the voices of women, so often excluded from such processes, are heard and that women are at the table when decisions are being made?
Well, she makes a very good point, and we must ensure that women are a part of the future build here, and we will ensure that we do so.
Sarah Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome yesterday's ceasefire agreement and the Prime Minister's statement today, and just want to recognise the leadership that he and his ministers have shown on this issue so tirelessly for such a long time. Now, we know sustaining the peace is dependent on humanitarian services scaling up rapidly in Gaza, and many NGOs are currently struggling with Israel's kind of restrictive and politicised new registration measures, leaving many in limbo and unable to work alongside UN agencies to scale up those services. What is the Prime Minister doing to ensure that we address this, tackle it, and make sure the needs of Palestinians are met as quickly as possible?
Prime Minister.
Well, she raised a really important issue in relation to some of the hurdles and barriers that are put in the way of those wanting to deliver aid, and we are working with others to scale up the volume and speed with which aid can get in.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement this afternoon? There will be a couple of moments whilst the front benches swap over and we do some furniture removal. Which brings us to the next business this afternoon, statement on the Northern Ireland Troubles. Secretary of State Hilary Benn.
With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the legacy of the Troubles, which still hangs heavily over the lives of so many people in Northern Ireland and indeed across the United Kingdom. The Good Friday Agreement, that extraordinary act of political courage, brought peace. But although its architects knew that legacy would have to be dealt with, they were not able to do so. This is, therefore, the unfinished business of that agreement, and why so many, too many, victims and survivors are still waiting for answers about what exactly happened to those they loved so much. The previous government's Legacy Act failed to win support in Northern Ireland, failed to comply with our international human rights obligations, and was undeliverable. Whatever its intentions, it was no basis for trying to move forward. And that is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government is today introducing new primary legislation and laying a draft remedial order under the Human Rights Act as we seek to fulfil our King's Speech commitment to repeal and replace the Legacy Act. Madam Deputy Speaker, this legislation will give effect to the framework that I announced with the Irish Government on the 19th of September, which reflects the principles of the Stormont House Agreement and contains sovereign commitments by both the UK and Irish governments. The new Troubles Bill will reform the Independent Commission to be renamed the Legacy Commission, with statutory oversight to provide accountability and confidence and learning from Operation Canova, a statutory victims and survivors advisory group. Significantly strengthen the governance of the Commission with 2 co-directors of investigations, statutory conflict of interest duties and appointments made only following independent advice. Enhance the investigative powers of the Commission and put in place a fairer disclosure regime, ensuring that the Commission has the powers it needs to find answers for families and can make public the maximum possible information consistent with the state's responsibility to protect life and national security. The bill will also fulfil the commitment we have made to restore the small number of Troubles-related inquests which were stopped in their tracks by the Legacy Act and refer the other inquests that had not yet commenced to the Solicitor General to independently consider whether in each case they are most appropriately dealt with by the reformed Legacy Commission or via the coronial system. Enable the reformed Commission to hold new proceedings in cases that transfer to it from the coronial system. Consistent with the provisions in the Inquiries Act, this will provide for public hearings, the consideration of sensitive information in closed hearings, and effective next of kin participation, including through legal representation. We will also address in the bill, rather than in the remedial order, the UK Supreme Court ruling in the Adams interim custody orders case regarding the application of the Carl-Toner principle. We must put beyond doubt Parliament's intention by clarifying that the relevant legislation allowed such orders to be made by junior ministers as well as by the Secretary of State. Madam Deputy Speaker, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to the 250,000 Northern Ireland veterans who served with honour and distinction to keep people safe and who worked with the police and other emergency services in the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Their service and their sacrifice will never be forgotten. That is why, having worked closely with the Defence Secretary and the Armed Forces Minister, the Government is introducing strong safeguards for veterans that respond directly to the concerns that have been expressed to us. These safeguards will also apply to other people, such as former police officers. They will mean that no witness will need to travel to Northern Ireland to engage with legacy mechanisms. They will have a right to do so remotely because coroners and judges in the Commission will be legally required to allow this, and support for veterans will be available to assist them in doing so. The Commission will be under a duty not to duplicate the work of previous investigations unless there are compelling reasons that make it essential to do so. The welfare of veterans will be given proper consideration as part of any assessment as to whether they are required to give evidence. This will include the right for veterans to seek anonymity when doing so. And our protections will not be limited to legislation. Any contact with veterans will be facilitated through the Ministry of Defence, protecting veterans from cold calling, and veterans will not be required to rehearse the historical context surrounding incidents where such information can be obtained from other sources, including the Ministry of Defence. These measures will provide what the 3 UK Veterans Commissioners have called for: not immunity from the law, but fairness under it. Madam Deputy Speaker, the remedial order which I am also laying today, will remove the previous government's much criticised immunity scheme, which offered false promises, was never introduced, and would have enabled those who committed the most appalling terrorist crimes to be granted immunity from prosecution. The principal reason why the Act was so strongly opposed in Northern Ireland. It will lift also the current prohibition on Troubles-related civil proceedings. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am grateful to the Taoiseach, Simon Harris, and his team for their open and constructive approach in reaching the framework agreement, which recognises that helping families affected by the Troubles is a shared responsibility. And that is why the joint framework contains specific and unprecedented commitments by the Irish Government to facilitate the fullest possible cooperation of the Irish authorities with a reformed Legacy Commission, establish a dedicated unit within An Garda Síochána to deal with Troubles-related cases, including investigating all outstanding cases in Ireland, and make a financial contribution of €25 million to help fund legacy mechanisms. This is, of course, in addition to the £250 million already committed by the UK Government. And where required, legislation will be introduced by the Irish Government to implement these commitments. We are also establishing with the Irish Government an independent commission on information retrieval, initially on a pilot basis, to provide families with an additional means of getting information. Madam Deputy Speaker, since my appointment last year, I have had many discussions with political parties, victims and survivors organisations, human rights groups, veterans and others affected by the Troubles. Given the views held by so many people, often diametrically opposed, it was always going to be impossible to set out a plan that gives everybody everything that they want. There will be elements of our approach that some people will welcome and others will not. I also recognise, because of what has gone before, there is a great lack of trust in all of us in this House on the part of victims and survivors. That is unfortunately the reality, but it is not, and it never has been, an argument for not trying to find a way forward. And I hope that those who want to see a fair and effective approach to legacy, which can command greater support in Northern Ireland, will recognise that these measures represent fundamental reform and will therefore be given a chance to succeed. Time waits for no one, least of all for the many families who lost loved ones, and they ultimately will be the judge of whether these new arrangements can give them the answers that they have sought for so long. And I hope that we will together be able to grasp this opportunity and so help the people of Northern Ireland to look to a future freer of the burden of the past. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State, Alex Burkhardt.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. The last government legislated to draw a line under Troubles-era litigation. That litigation was inevitably weighted against those who sought to protect our country from terrorism. Exactly. It was inevitably weighted against those who keep records and whose servicemen are easy to locate and contact. Even today, vexatious claims are being made. Only last week, a judicial review into a 1991 case was rightly thrown out by the High Court in Belfast. The judge described the challenge as utterly divorced from reality, but not before the former Special Forces soldier at the centre of it had to endure 4 years of investigation. Yeah. Mindful of cases such as this, the last government sought to draw a line, and with its actions today, this government is erasing that line. And as it does so, many former servicemen will again feel, with profound unease, that the lawyers are coming. I hope the House will this afternoon spare a thought for them. I know we will have a lot of time to debate the legislation the government is laying, but there are a number of specific questions that I would like to ask the Secretary of State now. First, on the resumption of inquests and civil cases, will he tell the House how many inquests will be restored and how many will be referred to the Solicitor General? Can he specifically tell the House whether that list will include the 1987 Lockall case?
Of course it will.
Likewise, civil cases is to reopen. It's thought that at the time of Prohibition, many hundreds of such cases, affecting perhaps thousands of people, were before the Belfast courts. What is the NIO's calculation of the number of civil cases that are now likely to proceed? I ask this, Madam Deputy Speaker, because there are clear financial consequences to reopening legacy in this way. The Secretary of State referred to £250 million already committed. Indeed, it was committed by the last government to deal with legacy as we framed it. But it is now clear that the new Legacy Commission is to have a much bigger remit than the ICRIR. If so, will its budget be increased? And if not, how will it be expected to function? Similarly, the police service in Northern Ireland has raised very serious concerns about the amount of money they will need to support reopened inquests and civil cases. Policy Exchange has placed this cost on the police as around £90 million at a time when police numbers in Northern Ireland are at an all-time low. There is a very real prospect that without additional funding from the Secretary of State, frontline policing in Northern Ireland will be further reduced. Can the Secretary of State make a commitment that that won't happen? Third, the government has briefed journalists today that legislation will ban Gerry Adams from receiving compensation for his detention in the 1970s, but the Secretary of State's statement made no reference to that. Can he tell the House unequivocally that Mr Adams will not receive one penny of compensation? Fourth, the Secretary of State listed a number of protections for veterans in court, but it's already the case that anonymity, age-related considerations and remote hearings are available at the discretion of the court. And that was apparent to the Taoiseach when, on the 19th of September, he emphasised that no new protections would be available to veterans. Does the Secretary of State agree with Mr Harris? There has also been some confusion about whether these protections would extend to paramilitaries. On the 25th of September, the Prime Minister claimed they did not. Can the Secretary of State be definitive for the House? Last, there is the question of the involvement of the Republic of Ireland in legacy. This has proved deeply controversial. I am sure the Secretary of State will be asked questions about it this afternoon. However, I was interested to see that the Republic has made commitments to get the Garda to investigate unresolved Troubles-related incidents within its jurisdiction and to legislate to enable the fullest possible cooperation of the relevant Irish authorities with the Legacy Commission. If this is so, if this is to happen, it is to be welcomed. Because during the Troubles, the UK repeatedly sought extraditions from the Republic to bring terrorist charges. In the vast majority of cases, they were turned down. Following 1998, the former Irish Justice Minister Michael McDowell said that the Irish government gave a de facto amnesty to the IRA. And indeed, there are very many instances of possible collusion between the Garda and the Provisional IRA which have never received the attention they deserve. Kingsmill, the murder of Ian Sproul, Bloody Friday, Taban, Le Mans, the list goes on. I sincerely hope that the Republic will now engage sincerely, deeply and honestly, and I hope the Secretary of State will ensure that it does.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his response. I mean, he says at the beginning that the last government sought to draw a line. It didn't work. It didn't work. And in the act of seeking to do that, and this is the one question that the now opposition has never been able to answer, it decided it would give terrorists immunity from prosecution. I've never heard, and oh yes, that is what the last government did, and I've never heard a justification. Yes, it